You are at Rest of the World News. Time now for the news review. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country is ready to launch its long-awaited counteroffensive against Russia. In an interview to Wall Street Journal, Zelensky said that he hoped Ukrainian troops would be able to take back territories lost to Russian forces. He added that a counteroffensive to reclaim territory would change the dynamics of the war. The comments came weeks after Zelensky said that he was still waiting for more Western ammunition and weapons to start the counteroffensive. Recently, he also embarked on a diplomatic mission for more Western support. Kiev's already intensified attacks inside Russia, as well as Russian-held regions, using artillery and drones. On Friday, Russian forces hit Kiev for a 6th day in a row. Okay, now time now to discuss this. So allow me to invite a couple of guests. Jana Miller, our correspondent, is joining me from Moscow. Also with me is Jim Kavanagh. He's a political analyst and blogger in New York. Good to have you both. Now, Johnny, tell us about this counteroffensive or counterattack that, media has been talking about this for quite some time. And it was last week, I believe, that Zelensky was also on a tour of, Europe, going to the UK here and there, trying to get more military hardware and logistics, and he was able to somehow. So is that a big deal, this counteroffensive that Kiev is saying that is prepared to go ahead?
Well, we've been hearing about the Russia counteroffensive for many months now. It used to be a spring counteroffensive. We're now moving into summer, so it's being rebranded as summer counteroffensive. It's not clear whether Zelensky's words recently suggest that the counteroffensive is about to start, or whether he's just trying to get more weapons and more funding, gain more trust with Western partners. It's very hard for him to continue to ask for weapons if there's not going to be any progress on the battlefield. So bringing up this counteroffensive is very important for Ukraine, but whether it's going to happen is not clear. There's some Ukrainian officials have already suggested that it already has begun. The Battle of Bakhmut, of course, which lasted about 9 months. Russia finally took Bakhmut. There was also some serious counteroffensive attempts by the Ukrainians around the flanks of Bakhmut, then using some of their best units. So that may well have been part of this counteroffensive, or indeed there may well be a large counteroffensive coming, but it is difficult to see as well just where Ukraine will launch this counteroffensive. Around Kherson, you've got the Dnipro River, Zaporozhye, we understand the Russians have built numerous lines of defenses around there. You move further out to Donetsk, a major city, and then around Bakhmut, it's the Russians moving forward. So there's some speculations that Ukraine may even push into continental Russia, if you like, in the Belgorod region. But it's still not clear whether this counteroffensive will happen. Will it be pushed back to summer now? Will it be pushed back to autumn? Or will Ukraine shock the world and launch it soon? It's not clear, but certainly Zelensky is very keen to promote the idea of this counteroffensive and the possibility of Ukraine taking back these 4 regions and getting more weapons and money from their Western partners.
Okay, Jim Kavanagh, as you know, Germany has given its Leopard tank, if I remember the name right, and then we had the UK also providing Kiev with missiles, the US with a long list of, let's say, ammo. So why don't they simply try to stop the war by kind of mediating and encouraging the sides to go to the negotiating table?
Well, situation, neither side is really ready to negotiate. It's as much as I criticize the United States' role in this, it's not really that the United States is preventing negotiations here. Neither Russia nor Ukraine is willing to negotiate. And this is an existential issue for Russia. There were negotiations. Let's not forget, there were already many rounds of negotiations. There was Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. Those negotiations succeeded, and then the parties, the Ukraine and the United States and NATO, turned them into an excuse for building an army. Then there were negotiations after the beginning of the war, which would have succeeded, and Ukraine would have ended up ceding 2 oblasts, Donetsk and Lugansk, But Boris Johnson flew in at the orders of Washington, to be sure, telling Zelensky, you cannot make peace with the Russians on these terms. So now everybody is all in, and the Russians, this war is going to end. The only negotiations are going to be over terms of surrender. And when that happens, when that situation comes to that point, where one side or the other is forced to capitulate, and it's not going to be Russia, then there'll be negotiations. What's going to happen is, if this counteroffensive occurs, or if it doesn't, I think, if you read even the Western accounts of this, everybody knows that the Ukrainian forces do not have the capacity to push the Russians out or to turn the tide of this war. And at the end of this, there's going to be a Russian offensive. There is a Russian offensive in certain cities right now, in Avdiivka and Malinka, and Russian forces are pushing forward. And you're going to have a Russian advance that's going to change the course of this war. And at that point, the Americans are going to want to negotiate. And they're going to have a ceasefire, and they're going to want to have international peacekeeping forces and no-fly zones. So the whole thing is going to depend on the course of the war on the battlefield right now. And it's not, neither Russia nor Ukraine are ready to give up anything that's crucial to them. And everything's crucial to Ukraine, and everything's crucial to Russia. The fight is going to continue.
Okay, Johnny, I should have asked you as the first question, but okay, no problem. Let's just talk about it now. Talk about this, the attacks being conducted on capital Kiev for the sixth straight day in a row. It's been targeted, and also we had the Bakhmut battle, and Russia said it's controlled the territory. So tell us about the situation on the battlefield as we speak.
Well, the Battle of Bakhmut, of course, was the most important battle in the war so far. Russia, of course, is taking that city. Both sides are claiming some kind of victory, but Bakhmut wasn't necessarily about the city. It is strategically important, but really it was the first time in some time the first two armies have really faced each other. Most of the territory taken in this conflict so far has been without much resistance from either side. But Ukraine will be hoping they've done enough damage to the Russian army to slow their advance. But it's important to recognize that most of the fighting done by Russia was done by the Wagner group. And most of the soldiers killed were ex-prisoners. On the Ukrainian side, it's their main army that's been killed. So Russia has lost a lot of prisoners, lost a lot of men. We're thinking 10, 20,000 soldiers perhaps. But the Russians claim that they've killed around 50,000 Ukrainians. So really the Russians will be hoping they've really broken the back of the Ukrainian armed forces. So the Battle of Bakhmut will go down probably in the history of this war as one of the most important events, and it's important to stress that Russia has come out on top in that. Meanwhile, as you say, Russia continues to hit Kiev, and of course one of the most worrying developments is these drone strikes on Moscow, and indeed Ukraine's bombardment of the Belgorod region inside Russia as well. Meaning your guest was saying that it's difficult to see negotiations starting, especially when Russia is fearful that Ukraine will continue to hit Russian territory.
Okay, Jim, given the situation that people are facing in Europe, especially, I'm talking about the cost of living crisis, the economic woes and issues. You have it in the UK, you have it in France, you have it in Germany, and elsewhere in Europe. So given this, and also the money that can be better spent back on home turf in the United States, how much longer could the West stomach this war? What's the prospect like?
Well, there's a push in the West for this offensive, and that's one of the reasons that Ukraine is attacking, cities in Moscow with drone strikes and little incursions across the border, even though these are not militarily going to be very effective. They're for the Western audience. Zelensky, the Ukrainian regime, the Kiev regime really needs to get the Western and the United States and Europe to continue funding and to continue supporting. And people are getting tired of it because their own lives are getting worse, and they're seeing $100 billion at least overall going to Ukraine with promises that everything you need. So, this is one of the reasons. This is I think Ukrainian army commanders were reluctant to go to this into this offensive, but the Americans and the Westerners said we have to have something to show our people. The support for the war in the West and in Europe relies on the idea that they're promoting this idea that Ukraine is winning and can win. You know, the Battle of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians wore down the Russians. It was at least a 6 to 7 to 1 advantage in artillery. That's acknowledged, that the Russians had 6 to 7 times more artillery strikes, and therefore it's more likely and probably true that the Ukrainians lost 6 to 7 times more soldiers. The name of the operation for the Russians was Operation Meat Grinder. It was designed to wear down the Ukrainian army. As your other guest said, it was the best of the Ukrainian army that fought there. The Russian regular army wasn't really even in that battle. Now they're in the battle. They're coming into the battle. And when they come into the battle, it's going to be another game. So the Western leaders need to keep the support of the population by showing some, they show fake advances. They're not fake, but they're not decisive things, these little incursions into Russia, but they make good headlines. Right. So that's the problem that the West has. How are you going to keep the public support for this? Okay, good question. Okay, thank you so much. John and Miller in Moscow, Jim Kavanagh in New York. And that's the end of this episode of the News Review on Press TV.